Hello everyone, it's Wednesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. The space arms race between the two Koreas is heating up. South Korea successfully launched its first indigenous military spy satellite from a U.S. military base in California last Friday, following the reclusive regime placing its own satellite into orbit shortly before. Officials are hoping the satellite will serve as an eye that will significantly boost South Korea's kill chain system. The tension has been also rising as North Korea issued another warning that after scrapping the Inter-Korean Military Accord, a physical clash and war is just a matter of time. How is South Korea's satellite different compared to the North's? And how is the international arena reacting to North Korea's moves? For this, we invited Dr. Go Myong-hyun, Senior Fellow from the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Welcome, Dr. Go.
Good to be here.
And we also have Mr. Bruce Klinger, Senior Research Fellow from the Heritage Foundation. Good to see you again, Mr. Klinger.
Thanks for having me.
All right, first question to our Mr. Klinger. South Korea successfully launched its first indigenous military spy satellite last week. Could you talk us through the satellite launch process? I mean, what kind of satellite was it?
It was an electro-optical imagery satellite along with an infrared package. And what that means is it's a photography satellite so that South Korea can have better access to what's going on in North Korea. And also infrared provides kind of around-the-clock coverage so that it can get a sense of what's going on in North Korea even at night. The U.S. has been providing satellite imagery to South Korea for quite some time. I was an imagery analyst with CIA for a dozen or more years, and we would share imagery on Northeast Asian areas. But South Korea wanted to have its own indigenous capability to augment what the U.S. was providing, as well as to having its own independent targeting and monitoring capability.
All right, so U.S. photography satellite that can even be used at night, I see. Now, Dr. Go, staying on the satellite front, military officials have expressed hope saying this satellite will serve as an eye for South Korea's kill chain preemptive strike system. In what ways could that be done?
Well, as Mr. Klinger has indicated, we have been relying on the United States for imagery analysis and imagery intelligence. And in order to implement the kill chain system, it's very important for South Korea to be able to conduct its own way of surveilling and the reconnaissance of the North Korean threats. So especially when it comes to preventive strike, the kill chain starts from when North Korea starts making the preparation for launching their ballistic missiles. And in order to detect such moves, it means South Korea has to conduct a 24/7 surveillance of what's going on in North Korea. And we can only do that through image analysis or other types of, there are other types of surveillance, but primarily it's imagery analysis. So that means that South Korea will have to launch more satellites. The reason is because the satellite doesn't really stay in orbit unless it's in the geostationary orbit, which is far above the Earth. The ones that the South Korea has just launched is actually a low Earth orbit, so it's within 500 kilometers or so. So that means that currently the satellite goes around the Earth very fast, so it doesn't stay above Korean Peninsula for a very long time. So that means in order to have a complete coverage of at least the North Korea, South Korea will have to launch more surveillance satellites in the future, and that's in fact the plan.
All right, so that is why South Korea is going to send 4 more SAR satellites. We're going to talk about it later, but before that, Mr. Klinger, as we know, the satellite launch came after Pyongyang's own spy satellite launch, and many officials say ours have much more capability compared to North Korea's. How different is it from Pyongyang's?
Well, neither Korea has released information on exactly how good the imagery will be, what quality resolution, but certainly South Korea, with much higher technology, the satellite is expected to be much better quality. There's some speculation that the North Korean imagery will only be a 3-meter resolution, which is certainly not nearly as good as even commercial satellite imagery, let alone the classified satellites that the U.S. has. That said, a lot can be done with poor quality imagery. You can detect if a military unit is in garrison or out of garrison, or if it's at training or even if it's preparing to invade the neighboring country. So, but also North Korea can get a lot more information about South Korea just from open sources. Obviously, South Korea is a much more open society than North Korea. So they can get targeting and monitoring information either from agents that they've snuck into South Korea or just from publicly available information. So certainly their satellite is not as good as the US or South Korea's or even commercial imagery, but it does give them a capability that will enable them to better monitor and track or even do battle damage assessment during a conflict than they have the capability right now.
All right, I see your point. Dr. Go, like I said before, let's talk about South Korea's future plans regarding the satellite. Seoul is expected to send 4 more SAR, synthetic aperture radar satellites, into space by 2025. Could you tell us in detail what South Korea plans to do?
So again, South Korea is planning to launch 4 SAR radars, which in South Korean intelligence community is pronounced SAR. So essentially, it treats SAR, no initials, but also proper noun. And then also, it's going to be in conjunction with the satellite that was just launched from the Vandenberg Air Base in the United States, which is an electronic optical infrared satellite. So if you combine the initials of these 2 types of satellites, will be, by Korean pronunciation, will be SAR-EO.
SAR-EO.
So that's why the project's name is 425. Which in Korean is pronounced SAR-EO. So this is the reason behind the naming of this particular project. So there will be 4 SAR surveillance satellites in orbit until 2025, in addition to the one that was just launched, which is an electronic optical satellite. So the objective is for the Korean government to be able to conduct surveillance of North Korea every 2 hours. So even that is a minimum requirement, I would say. So South Korea is planning to launch even more so that it can have a complete coverage of North Korea 24/7. So it means that we'll be launching even more satellites of this type in different combinations.
All right, I see. Well, thank you for explaining why this project is called 425 project. All right. Mr. Klinger, North Korea will hold a plenary meeting of the ruling Workers' Party later this month. What kind of policies do you expect to be decided during the meeting regarding the satellite?
Well, they will certainly pat themselves on the back for having the successful launch after 2 previous failures. They may provide details on the quality of the satellites, and I would also think they would identify a little more clearly what the future plans are. Kim Jong-un has said that they will launch a number of additional satellite reconnaissance systems, but they haven't identified how many. So perhaps they'll let us know, if not the exact number, at least the scope of the project. So, and I'm sure they'll also point out that it provides the targeting capability to the very large number of different missile systems that they've been creating in recent years. And I'm sure they'll highlight that it gives them a capability that they didn't have before, that now that they have a better ability to threaten the United States as well as its allies. So we may see some details for the satellite system program, as well as perhaps any new additional systems that North Korea is going to unveil in the future. They may also give a status report of the other military systems that Kim Jong-un directed his scientists to pursue in January 2021 in a major speech.
All right, I see. We'll have to wait and see what kind of details are shown during this plenary meeting. Now, Dr. Go, let's also talk about other possibilities as well. Recently, it was reported that what Pyongyang fired right after launching the spy satellite was an Irbm with solid fuel engine, which eventually failed. That being said, is there any possibility the regime will again fire this solid fuel Irbm soon?
Like a clockwork, yeah, that's exactly what one would expect from North Korea. It's probably like 100% predictability in that regard. North Korea has a very clear established pattern of provocations. For instance, if they want to launch or unveil a new ballistic missile system, first thing they do is to test on a new rocket engine. Sometimes it's liquid fuel, but recently has been solid fuel rocket engines because that's a strategic significance in itself, because it shortens the time for the launch preparations. So recently North Korea unveiled a solid fuel rocket engine, and then the expectation was that North Korea would soon test a ballistic missile, and voila, it was happened to be the new IRBM. And North Korea, it's necessary for North Korea to complete the development of this IRBM because he has already reached the development of solid fuel rocket engines in other types of ballistic missiles. Yeah, so in a missile portfolio, you will have, depending on the range, you will have a short-range ballistic missile, intermediate range, and long range, as well as the intercontinental range ballistic missiles. So only part of the missile portfolio where North Korea is lacking a solid fuel rocket engine happens to be the intermediate range one. So essentially, it's mathematical in a way that North Korea will complete the development of this particular ballistic missile system. So yeah, I mean, it's going to come very soon. Now that North Korea has succeeded with the launch of the new space vehicle, Chanlima-1, there's no further need for North Korea to demonstrate this space vehicle capability. So essentially, they are going to go after the one area that's still left to be developed, and that's going to be the IRBM side.
All right, I see your point. Now, shifting gears a little bit here, Mr. Klinger, after withdrawing entirely from the 2018 Inter-Korean Agreement, North Korea has been restoring its guard posts in the DMZ, stationing troops and weapons around the border. What exactly has the regime done around the border area up until now?
Well, we've seen South Korean reporting that North Korea has resumed manning some of the guard posts that they had abandoned as part of the comprehensive military agreement. And also there have been photos of some recoilless rifles and other weapons that have been returned into the DMZ or close to the DMZ area. And South Korea has said that it may reciprocate by doing the same. So while some have said this is escalating tensions and the peninsula is closer to conflict, I think it's more just a case of we're returning to the 2018 status quo when before the comprehensive military agreement was reached. So the CMA was oversold by the Moon Jae-in administration, but it was a way of kind of reducing the potential for inadvertent clashes along the DMZ or inadvertent escalation of tactical clashes to a more strategic confrontation. So it was a good measure at the time. It could have led to additional confidence and security building measures, but it never reduced the actual military threat from North Korea. It just reduce the potential for accidental clashes along the DMZ. So we're back to 2018, but it's not necessarily a big escalation in tensions.
All right, I see. Now, as our Mr. Klinger already pointed out, Dr. Go, South Korea is too expressing its willingness to reciprocate Pyongyang's redeployment of guard posts in the DMZ. What is Seoul expected to do?
Well, I think South Korea is pursuing two objectives here. One is clearly a symbolic one, so essentially reciprocating North Korean actions in this regard. It's an eye for an eye kind of a response. So since North Korea has rebuilt a guard post in the DMZ, South Korea will reciprocate that by building its own guard post or restoring those posts in the previous locations. But then there's also a tactical objective there, which is more pragmatic. So what the area in which South Korea is going to restore this guard post will be the area in Gosong, which lies to the east of the country in the mountainous area of Gangwon province. And that particular segment of the DMZ happened to be quite vulnerable to North Korean infiltrations. There have been several cases of unknown individuals trespassing, and then crossing into the north from the south, and sometimes obviously also with North Korean infiltration from the north. And it shows that it's very necessary for South Korea to have physical presence in the DMZ to forestall these kind of infiltrations in both directions. So for that reason alone, I think South Korea is focusing on that area. Essentially, it's a pragmatic move on the part of South Korea. But having said that, I think South Korea understands that carrying out this action could make the South Korean personnel and soldiers vulnerable to North Korean attacks. This has happened before in the past. So I think they are taking very deliberate steps to make sure that North Koreans cannot exploit this opportunity to harm South Korean personnel. So it's going to take a while because it's going to be a very deliberate process. It's going to be very careful.
Right. So for symbolic purpose, it is going to restore guard posts in the DMZ, and for the tactical purpose, it is going to have physical presence of the military nearby the Gosang area.
Yeah, Gosang area. That's right. Yes.
All right. I see. Now, Mr. Klinger, to the international response against North Korea's escalating provocations, the U.S., Japan, Australia, and South Korea came up with their own sanctions against Pyongyang over the spy satellite launch, marking the first time the four countries imposed sanctions on the regime around the same time. What are the details, and could this be alarming for the North?
The sanctions were targeted at individuals and organizations affiliated with North Korea's satellite system and satellite launch. And also they sanctioned the Kim Suk-hee North Korean cyber attack unit. One question I always have whenever we see sanctions is, on the one hand, it's always a good step, it's a good reaction, but it's why didn't we do it before? Certainly we knew of North Korea's satellite program with the 2 failed launches before. So, what we've seen over the years and decades is not only the U.S., but other nations have sort of always held back on sanctions enforcement in order to have something to sanction after the next North Korean provocation. It's sort of like, instead of going after all the criminals that you have evidence for, the police holding back and only arresting a few each time, and then when another crime is committed, then they go after a few more. But on the positive side, it certainly is a good development that we see countries, I think, better coordinating now on sanctions enforcement. Hopefully that'll lead to a more robust fulfilling of sanction enforcement of not only UN resolutions, but international law. Nations really have been holding back on doing that. And what we've seen really in the past several years is, while China and North Korea are acting, much more belligerently across the board on different actions, it's led to the United States and not only its formal allies, but also friends and partners throughout the Indo-Pacific working more closely together, not only on military and security issues, but also on supply chain guarantees and economic issues and technology support to each other. So China and North Korea are really driving the democracies in Indo-Pacific closer together by their belligerent and coercive actions.
All right, I see your point, Mr. Klinger. Now, Dr. Go, national security advisors of South Korea, Japan, and the U.S. will meet up next week in Seoul. What discussions are expected in terms of dealing with this North Korea's ongoing provocations?
Well, so this is actually a byproduct of the Camp David agreement that the three countries have reached back in August. So in that agreement, the three countries have agreed to conduct regular meetings, not just among the national security advisors of the three countries, but also the defense ministers and foreign ministers. And then also there are more like working level meetings at the staff level involving cybersecurity and then other economic security matters as well. So this means the institutionalization of the trilateral cooperation, and that which is very much the objective of the Camp David. So we are seeing the manifestation or implementation of the agreement right now. And so this is the reason why the topics that are going to be discussed this particular meeting not just involves North Korea, which will be very particular to the Korean Peninsula, but also the export control measures and technology. So this is has a wider global implications and shows that these three countries are working together very closely to ensure that this trilateral cooperation extends beyond the very narrow field of security cooperation to other areas. And also I think it's kind of flexing the muscle at the global scale, because we're talking about the three countries that are technological powerhouses. So I think this is the reason why at the meeting in a way that's unfamiliar, especially to Koreans here, that the national security advisors are going to be discussing about technology and export control measures.
So you're saying that this is mainly just part of institutionalizing the meetings between the national security advisors and other
exactly,
people.
but then it's not just a merely symbolic, kind of mark the calendar kind of a meeting in the sense that, we scheduled a meeting. Well, we plan to have a meeting every year, therefore we should get together. Without any purpose even, but then that's not the case. It means that there will be always a constant working agenda among these high-level officials, and there will be plenty of work to do in that sense because the area of cooperation is expanding very fast among these three countries.
All right, I see. Now, Mr. Klinger, I believe this would be our last question. So North Korea has been threatening war with the South, saying it's only a matter of time until there's a physical clash and war on the Korean peninsula. With such a warning coming from the North, how should South Korea tackle this?
Well, we should always be concerned about any North Korean threat, but we also have to be aware of the decades of threats that never came about. So they've said everything from any time we impose sanctions, it's an act of war, or and they would retaliate. And also anytime the U.S. or its allies do military exercises or other activities, they've often said that was an act of war and would lead to a military clash. So we can't overreact every time North Korea threatens war or clashes along the DMZ, but we always have to be very concerned about tactical or strategic attacks by the North. And how we respond is maintaining a very strong alliance, not only between the U.S. and South Korea, but also between the U.S. and Japan, which would be a critical player in any kind of conflict on the Korean Peninsula. And also, as Dr. Go points out, is we've had much better coordination now on a trilateral basis because of President Yoon's outreach. And so that's enabling not only real-time exchange of information on North Korean missile launches, but a resumption of military exercises amongst the three countries last year. And I think a lot better and more involved security cooperation amongst the three countries. So we have to always maintain our vigilant deterrence and defense capabilities. And that includes not only deploying whatever systems are necessary, but also training them. And so the resumption of the trilateral exercises, as well as the resumption of large-scale bilateral U.S. ROC military exercises last year, was a way of maintaining and improving deterrence capability.
All right, I see. So we would have to be cautious and vigilant, but we don't have to react. All right, Mr. Klinger, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Mr. Klinger and Dr. Go, for your time and insights. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.